From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs, and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello, welcome once again back to Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis, and this is a usual gathering here on Can TV and online. Glad you could join us, and thanks for being here. An eventful week. They are all eventful weeks lately. Every week seems to be eventful, but this time we had a moment of democracy breaking out at the Chicago Public Schools, the Board of Education. One of the members actually voted no on something. So, of course, it didn't matter. It was their last meeting, so, you know, there won't be any repercussions from that. And we had the President of the United States. POTUS flew in town for, you know, to do the Oprah show, of course. But I found it more interesting that he flew into town to sort of remind us that Mayor Daley is not going away. He's got 30, 40 different things. He's on the chopper telling the president about things that he needs to get done in Chicago. So expect to be hearing from Mayor Daley. And that, I find that fascinating because I don't know exactly what form that's going to take, but maybe he's going to be sticking around. And also, of course, we have Father Pfleger losing his job, although it wasn't really losing his job, but we may kick that around a little bit. But I'm very honored today to have two people who are really distinguished in journalism in Chicago and who have really spent a lot of time trying to tell us about the side of the city that many of us don't really understand. I'm referring to Alden Loury, who's joining us again, been on the program many times. He's the publisher, I believe, of the Chicago Reporter, the barn boss at Chicago Reporter, one of the most respected publications in Chicago. And we have our very first ever Pulitzer Prize winner on the program here today. See right here on the Chicago Sun-Times, they've got it there. 2011 Pulitzer Prize winner, local reporting. This is one of the guys who did it, Frank Main, joining us here today. Frank, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let's just start right there. You and Mark Conkle and John Kim, the photographer, put together a series of pieces about crime in Chicago where you uncovered a lot of things, but there were some statistics that I had not seen before and that I found very interesting. In particular, this thing about 30% of murders in a given year are cleared. We talk about the murder rate in Chicago, how many people are killed, but I don't think too many of us realize that only about a third of them are ever actually...
And that's been really fallen over the last decade. I mean, it was above 50% 10 years ago.
And that's part of what you found out about. Also, we'll get into this later, but I also found it interesting that 20% of the detective positions in Chicago are vacant right now. There's only 270, or there's 270 detective vacancies.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
So they're really, in some parts of the city, they're really having to scramble. In this one of our series, we shadowed Area 5 Northwest Side homicide detectives for 4 months on one murder, and what they have in their office is like a whiteboard with all the homicides for the last 2 years, and they're the ones that have been unsolved are red, and the ones that are solved are blue, and when you actually see all those names and see that those are all people who died in murders in Chicago, it's pretty stunning, you know.
And a lot of red ink. A lot
of red ink, and not, not a lot of numbers of detectives to chase all those. So,
I guess you kind of, well, you should tell us how you kind of got this idea. You wanted to sort of take one weekend and kind of look at that. I just think that's a great way to do journalism, to sort of like find the small story and then build the big story around it.
Well, what really happened is that in April 2008, there was this weekend with 40 shootings, and Jody Weiss was the new superintendent, and he had a press conference on a Sunday, I believe, and acknowledged that this was, this particular weekend was out of control, and so a lot of media focused on that weekend as a result, and so what we did way back then was go into each of the neighborhoods where these shootings occurred, and we kind of profiled them. And so that was not part of what we entered in the Pulitzers, but that was a series we did back in 2008. So 2 years later, we said, you know what? I wonder what happened to, in all those 40 cases. And so
the very thing that the news media never has the time or the inclination to do. Don't have the resources in many cases, but this incredible notion of following up on something as big as that. I mean, this mayhem, but you know, a week or two later, there's more mayhem, and it just kind of gets forgotten about.
Right, and we didn't set out actually to do a giant project on that weekend. You know, we didn't know what we were getting into, and when we started peeling off shooting by shooting by shooting, and we realized in all these cases there were no charges. And eventually, in doing this, we found that of the 40 shootings, there was only one case that was charged, and that happened to be a guy with an AK-47 who was shooting at the police, and it was a slam dunk for them.
They had witnesses who were police officers.
Exactly.
Right.
And in many of these other cases, we talked to people who, for whatever reasons, knew who shot them. The people who survived knew who shot them in many cases, and didn't want to say who it was. So that's how the whole system kind of fell apart in this particular case.
Because of this culture of no snitching, and that you've written so effectively about.
Yeah, and you know, that's part of it, and I think that's kind of the mindset of some of the gang members who are out there who don't want to cooperate with the police no matter what. And you know, you got to be a little bit more sympathetic to some other people who seem to me to be innocent victims, and they didn't want, you know, more violence to come down on their families. And so they also said, you know, I don't want to ID this guy because he knows where I live, and he'll come back and shoot my house up.
And that, I think it's really important to emphasize that too, because it's too easy to just kind of, again, for those of us who live in communities in Chicago that are not these small areas that we're talking about, it's real easy to just kind of look down our noses and say, look at that, these people who just don't want to, you know, that someone shot, they know who it is, and they won't communicate. Well, you know, it's not quite like that. If you lived in one of these communities, you would have a whole different set of concerns.
Exactly right. I mean, one guy that was, I think, the most sympathetic person in our story was he was a migrant worker who lived out in California, and he worked in strawberry fields. And he had some family members that came to Chicago for some opportunities, and he wound up getting a job at a grocery store in a south suburb, and he lived on the southeast side. And you know, he was doing his best to keep it all together. You know, honest guy, you know, working hard. We visited him at the grocery store. We got run off when we tried to talk to him there, and so we kept trying to approach him, and finally we found him at his house. And so he let us in, and he showed us his X-rays of his shooting. He showed us where, you know, the scar where it happened, and you know, he said, you know, at the time I really did not want to tell the police who did it, because I know this person, you know, lives 3.5 blocks from me, and you know, I knew he would come back and get me. Yeah. And it was in this case a mistaken identity thing. He lives in a kind of he lived in kind of a gang war zone, and I think that's what happened. They just kind of randomly shot at a bunch of people who were having a barbecue in a garage, and he got hit. You know.
Yeah, somebody who does live in these communities and spent my entire life there. You know, for the most part, born in a public housing development and moved to Auburn Gresham as a young child, and pretty much been in there most of my life. Sometime in South Shore and Chatham and stints. But it is, I think, a far more complex situation than folks may realize, and the relationship between the community, if you will, and the police is a tenuous one. But yeah, there certainly is an element in the community, and I think it's safe to say, somewhat criminal element that has, you know, like maybe it's an honor code among thieves, where they just don't talk to police officers. But I do think that that's a small portion of the community. That's not to say that everybody else does not have issues. There are safety concerns, certainly. Remember one of the projects I did at the Reporter, spent 3 months on the ground in Inglewood, not far from where I grew up, and it's palatable. You know, people are like, you have some very courageous folks who are willing to go in front of the police and talk and so on and so forth, but you have others who have been intimidated to the point where they are just very careful about how they do communicate with the police. So they may go to CAPS meetings and they don't say anything publicly, but after the meeting they may grab a couple of officers and pull up to the side and tell them, hey, this is going on, that's going on. People were even talking about the gang members send covert operatives to the CAPS meetings to listen and watch and see who's talking. There were folks who talked about being approached by gang members. So it's a very real situation for people. It can make it difficult to communicate. The other thing to remember too is that 75 to 80% of the people who are killed in murders are people who have prior criminal records. And the people who are doing the shooting have a very similar background. So it's when these murder cases happen, oftentimes the shooters and the people who are being killed aren't Boy Scouts, and so therefore they may not necessarily have the best relationships with police, or for a variety of reasons may not want to divulge too much.
Or they may want to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah, that's a real problem. Yeah.
I found that really interesting in part of your story too, where these two detectives that you're shadowing, here they are working their guts out trying to solve a murder of a kid that is not terribly sympathetic. I mean, they know this is it's kind of a well-known sort of gangbanger, and he's not somebody that you would want to be, he's not going to be winning any civic awards, but their job is to find who killed him and bring that person to justice, and there have to be days when it's just got to be really hard to do that.
Right, and that story was interesting too. That was a different thing that we did. We spent 4 months with these detectives, and a young man was murdered near Humboldt Park and in Palmer Square, actually. He was a member of the Orchestra Albany, which is like a strange-sounding gang. They actually this gang developed out of a school orchestra nearby, and in the 70s. And the kid, again, is not sympathetic. His parents were seemed to be wonderful people, to tell you the truth, and very hardworking folks. And this kid, they worked so hard, I think, that this kid was kind of off on his own and got mixed up with the wrong crowd. And so what was interesting in that case is none of his buddies would cooperate at all with the police. And they brought one of these kids in, and they sat him in the homicide room with the victim's parents, and they kind of had a heart-to-heart with this kid and said, "Look, are you a man? Are you my kid's friend, or what are you? And the kid kind of gave up a little bit then, but not a lot, but just kind of
good police work.
Yeah,
and again, the kind of thing that just is not visible to the citizens of Chicago unless guys like you go in there and actually spend some time and see it. So we could spend the rest of the half hour cataloging all of these issues, and I think we know they're there. At some point, we really have to kind of ask this brain trust at the table if you guys believe that there's anything that a new mayor, a new city council can do.
And I think you said it best. There were these CAPS meetings that you were in and saw. And there are people believe that in some cases, gang members or other, criminals were sending people in to kind of spy on the citizens talking to the police. So there's got to be some sort of a model. But what's happened, the problem in the last 10 years is community policing is kind of like disintegrated. And it's been replaced by, tactical units that are going into neighborhoods to contain things. But you don't have that citizen involvement anymore with the police. And I think that the people that Rahm Emanuel's looking at right now, at least 2 of them have backgrounds in community policing.
McCarthy, right?
McCarthy and Gil Kurlikowski supposedly was one of the innovators of community policing.
Yeah.
And knows Rahm Emanuel from that, I think maybe from the Clinton administration. But I think they need to come up with some sort of new initiative that makes CAPS a kind of a stronger element in the equation, and it's not a kind of a soft, feel-good kind of PR thing. It's actually intervening in crime. And I know Ceasefire, as you guys know, has been doing some of that now. And if we could bring citizens into that a little bit more, I think that's one of the big solutions.
Alden, you've been around for a while in this. I mean, from the perspective of today, When was CAPS first introduced? Around the time Daley came into office, was it like 20 years ago?
I want to say it was the, oh God, I'm going to get this wrong, the early to mid 90s, and they started, I think, with 5 kind of pilot communities, and it ran there for a few years.
It's
and then
been
it was
around
citywide.
for a while.
Yeah, 15, 16 years at least.
Can you look back on it now and say that there was a time when it showed promise, that it was beginning to work? Or do you agree with this kind of notion that it was good once and it's tapered off to nothing? Or what's your assessment of it?
I think the idea of it is has a great deal of merit. I don't know if the city and I would say the rank and file in the police department have ever really bought into it. When I did my time investigating CAPS, I was in the 7th District. And this was back in 2000, and that was one of the pilot districts. So CAPS had been around for a few years by that point. And there was a lot of energy among residents there really to work and cooperate with police officers, and I think there is still throughout the city. But the department has some structural issues that make it difficult. For one of the things that we discovered when we were there was just there wasn't a lot of continuity between the officers who were at those meetings, and there was continuity among the residents. You had some diehards who were there every meeting, but the same officers, and particularly the sergeants who were leading those meetings, changed up a great deal. So it made it difficult to really build the kind of relationships that community policing is supposed to build. The other thing is there became a lot of just very open-ended sessions where people came in, mentioned problems, and the officers were there to hear them. And I'm not saying that that's not good, that's at least a dialogue. It's a chance for people to interface with the police and let them know what's going on. But I think the concept that Ramsey and some of the other folks who were innovators of community policing in Chicago had was a much more intricate type of relationships. Problem solving was the term that was used a lot in the early years of community policing. And I think even at that point was one of the things that we noticed. They weren't really doing problem solving in these meetings, and that was 10 years ago. So that's one question I've always had about community policing. Is it really operating the way it was designed to operate?
And again, there's been this, I hate to call it anything else, but sort of conventional wisdom that either Mayor Daley soured on it or the police through their various changes in top command soured on it, and in the last 8, 9, 10 years it's pretty much been dismantled. Do you guys agree with that notion?
Well, I think one big thing was, I mentioned Charles Ramsey, who, from what I understand, was really one of the big proponents of it when he was here. And then when he lost out on the superintendent's job, I believe when Terry Hillard became superintendent, and that was still in the early years of CAPS, I think it lost a good deal of the momentum that it had, and maybe it didn't have the right proponents or
wasn't
supporters
getting the push from the top
at the top that it needed to really be carried out.
And I mean, I guess the question is then, is that one of the tools that can help to turn this around, or are we just chasing kittens up trees here? I mean, is that really not going to help? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, one of the things we've batted around on this show quite a bit was the tenure of Weiss. When Superintendent Weiss was here, there was a sense that he was kind of told, we want you to start reallocating the police forces. We want these quick strike units that are going to go where the trouble is and really work there. And again, this notion that he kind of started doing that, and that became very unpopular in certain parts of the city, and then that
depends on who you talk to. I mean, you see, I was out watching that happen as well, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, there will be a shooting on the west side. There'll be a memorial that's placed there, and what would always happen, not always, but often happen in the past, is then the rival gang would come by and they would shoot up people at the memorial, or there'd be fighting at the exact location where previous shooting was, retaliatory shootings, and so they would send in this mobile strike force, and these guys all were heavily armed, and they would just kind of lock down that area. And these conflicts are super localized in a lot of these neighborhoods, and if you can do that, then then they're not gonna have this fight a mile or two away. It's gonna be here. So they cool things down. Then they can work on the intelligence to find out who's doing what, and they did put a lid on a lot of stuff. So you talk to some neighborhoods, and neighbors in some of those neighborhoods are like, yeah, I don't necessarily like all these guys in black who are running around with these guns in my neighborhood, but they're not shooting it up like they would do it in the past.
So I mean, I've never been able to get a handle on this, because it's like, I'm trying to imagine if you were living in one of these just really violent parts of the city, you could hear a whole bunch of do-gooders talking about, yeah, we need to get community policing in here, but you say, no, what we need in here is we need the SWAT team. We need people in here to protect us.
I think you need both.
I mean, obviously the answer is both, but how do you draw that balance? And what is the next superintendent going to be faced with walking into this city that is so bifurcated? I mean, there are, where did I read this? Just yesterday, there are a couple of beats, I guess this was part of your series, right? There are some beats in Chicago where there's almost no recorded crime at all.
Right.
Particularly around Lincoln Park and out on the far northwest side. And then there are, of course, the other places where, a huge percentage of all this crime happens. I'm not even sure what my question is, but I'm trying to put this in some perspective with what Rahm Emanuel must be dealing with.
It's hard to
right
live in
now.
some of these neighborhoods. You're essentially, we've kind of branded or criminalized certain parts of the city where you drive through and there's a blue light going, and
Right.
and it's got to be stressful to live in that neighborhood and see that, oh, the city believes that we're one of the worst places.
It's been officially
we're one of the worst places now.
Right.
And now we have this huge presence of police in here, and but again, some people like the cameras, some people like the cops there. I think the other part of the equation that seems to have worked is this kind of private solution through ceasefire, where they send these people, a lot of whom have prior gang records, into neighborhoods to intervene in conflicts, and it seems to work. And if the police could somehow adopt a similar strategy, involving the community, that would be great. I don't know how they can do that. Somehow. Protect the anonymity of people who are helping the police to identify these problems,
Yeah, and just being cognizant that there are people who are not going to be forthcoming because the fear is someone's going to see me talking to the police, and that's going to put me at danger. I can vividly remember a neighbor of mine talking about their reticence to calling the police. And one time they did, something had happened on the block, they did call the police, and a squad car came to the house. 2 officers came to the door, and the thought was, it's great, I'm glad they came, I'm glad they're concerned, I'm glad they're going to do something about this.
But now what?
But yeah, it was
what happens
publicly
when they
visible
leave?
that I called the police.
When that squad car leaves, what happens to me?
Right. Then the thing to remember too, though, that there is a very strong sentiment in many of these neighborhoods where people are very open to calling the police. They've got signs in their windows, we call the police. What I think it will take on some level, and the mayor, I think, has the ability to do some of this. There needs certainly be a coming together. The community in some respects does really need to step up in terms of providing a lot of the social services, I think, that are needed to deal with some of the underlying root causes of crime, be it mentoring, be it after school education, be it just general assistance for families that are struggling. You got a lot of young families, and I think if you were to look at a lot of the people who are committing these crimes, what you'll find is they come from very difficult and challenging family situations. And then on the other side, the police department, I think, needs to really recognize and understand that they need a better relationship with these communities. And that can be built just perhaps on smarter police work and better ways of handling and dealing with people. Because there is a sense that, these communities are criminalized, and no matter who you are or what you do, when you get in your car and drive, or when you walk down the street, an officer is going to see you as a suspect before they see you as a citizen. And so that's something that does need to be handled and dealt with. And then the mayor, I think, can really help with some of the economic stuff that happens and how that leads to crime. The drug problem in Chicago, which is very pervasive on the south and west sides of the city. I think the major root cause of that is just the need for a real economic engine in many of those neighborhoods.
Frank, I heard you on Bill Cameron's show over on WLS. They put you on the spot and said, is it going to be of the 3 that you've written about who may become the police superintendent, 2 of them are from outside. I don't know if you got a chance to see Richard Breezak on Chicago Tonight last night, but that was unbelievable. He hasn't been superintendent for 30 years and called them carpetbaggers and called McCarthy a whiner and said, we don't need these guys coming in here. We need somebody from within the police department.
You know, and you look at the choice for the head of the Chicago Public Schools, and I think Rahm Emanuel cares where they come from. And you know, I think that he wants results, and I really don't even think that he cares whether they're going to improve morale or not. I think he, you know, his number one goal is to, you know, he said it, I want to reduce violent crime. So I don't think that that's going to be, the carpetbagger issue is going to be in the equation here. I think it's more, you know, what are these guys' qualifications? When I predicted Gary McCarthy, I mean, that's where the weather vane was going then, and you know, I think he still has a good shot at it. You know, he was number 2 guy in Chicago. In the New York Police Department. He runs the Newark one now. He's very well versed in crime strategy, and you know, he was a real police officer in New York, and you know, in that context, you know, he dealt with a similar city where you have all sorts of different ethnic and socioeconomic differences in the city, and a lot of politics involved in policing, and he's, you know, the same thing is in Chicago. But
by the time people see this program, that choice may already have been made.
Yes.
The speculation is it's nothing more than that at this point. But it does look like the 2 of the 3 people who are being put out there, touted, you have your sources,
right,
are definitely from outside the system, and those appear to me anyway to be the stronger candidates. But I mean, Alden, you get the final word on this. Does any of this matter? Does it matter if there's if police morale, if police officers' feelings are hurt by who their commander-in-chief is?
Well, I think it does matter. I mean, I think Weiss's tenure was really marred by the poor relationship that he had with his officers, and a lot of that was set when he walked in through the door. The fact that he had never been a street cop, the fact that he was from outside the department, and he worked for a federal agency, it was something that was really hard for a lot of officers to get. So Rahm, by picking someone who at least will be accepted by rank and file, will at least give that superintendent a bit of a leg up. But no, that's certainly not the scope of the problems or the limited scope of the problem. Things are deep. It's going to take someone who's very effective, but having the officers behind them, I think will be helpful.
And I think that's where we're going to have to drop it. A rather serious and somber program today, but a very serious topic. And I really can't thank both of you enough for coming and sharing a little bit of time with us today, talking about police. And there's going to be a lot more, of course, about this as time goes by. By the time we do next week's show, maybe, I don't know, Frank, you think they're going to announce this next week or so?
I think I have every expectation that we're going to know within a week, you know, where it is, and I think he's going to announce his whole public safety team, and I think
we'll do that real soon.
Yeah,
gonna have to let it go there. Frank Main from the Chicago Sun-Times, Pulitzer Prize winner in the latest series. Pick that up at the Sun-Times. It's really interesting to watch. And Alden Loury, also here from the Chicago Reporter. That's it for today. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom on CAN TV. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can find us here on cable. You can see this and other programs online at can.blip.tv. And I'm Ken Davis. Next week, I'll get that right. And thanks for watching us here on Chicago Newsroom. See you next time.